What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on a 2020 BMW 330i xDrive. Today on the 330, we are going to be covering a couple different things under the engine bay. We are going to be breaking up these videos into a 4-part series, where we are going to be covering the valve cover or valve cover gasket replacement, the high pressure fuel pump replacement, fuel injectors replacement, and the van nose solenoid actuator replacements. For the purpose of today's DIY, we are going to be focusing solely on the valve cover. This is going to be the bigger part out of these 4 videos. All of these are going to be covered to some degree, if not fully, honestly, for this one DIY. But we are going to be splitting them up. If you just want to figure out how to do the fuel injectors without removing all of this, be sure to check out that video, as well as the high pressure fuel pump and or the solenoid actuators. The valve cover gaskets on these BMWs, and pretty much any BMW over time, tends to become hard plastic, causing it to not seal anymore, giving you leaks. Typically these leaks are falling over onto the exhaust manifold, giving you sometimes smoke, but definitely a bad smell in the cabin. Our recommendation, if you're doing this kind of work, which is a bit involved on these newer cars, is to just replace the whole valve cover if you can. The reason for that being is, one, these are made out of plastic. Plastic and heat over time don't get along. These can get brittle, but mainly they warp, and then no matter how many gaskets you throw at it, they will never seal properly again. Not to mention the PCV system is also built into the valve cover, so if that starts to fail, the only real way to fix it is by replacing the whole valve cover as a whole. So again, if you can swing it, do the whole unit, do the job once, you'll be good for at least another 70 to 100,000 miles. Otherwise, it should be pretty good. We are going to be touching again on all of these other parts throughout this DIY, so if you want to focus on one more involved video, this is going to be the one for you. But before we get into it, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. All right, for this job, we have a 3/8 drive torque wrench, 3/8 drive ratchet, 1/4 inch ratchet, a couple of extensions for those, as well as some adapters to flip-flop between the two. We have a 17 millimeter line wrench for our fuel lines. You can use a regular 17 as well. The line wrench just gives a little bit more insurance as far as rounding out that nut. We have a right angle pick, flathead screwdriver, some adjustable pliers, a trim removal tool. As far as specialty tools from CTA, we have 2807. That's going to help us with the van nose solenoids actuator at the back of the cylinder head. We have CTA 3766. This is going to help us pull out our injectors. We have a M6 thread chaser. Let's talk sockets. We have a 16, a 13, a 10, and an 8. Torques, we have a T20, T25, and T30, 2 different size T30s there. As far as E-torque sockets go, we have an E6, an E8, and an E10. We have this crank socket here. This is from Hazit. This has a 4 like dowel opening on it, and these are going to key into the 4 bolts coming off of the crank pulley, which will help us rotate that later on. A magnet, because I'm definitely going to drop some hardware. We have some dielectric grease, paint pen, some brake clean, and an electric ratchet. Like any DIY like this that's a bit involved, we recommend you watch it all the way through in case we add any tools, sub any tools out, and so on and so forth. Again, shop towels are going to be super handy too for cleaning all our surfaces up. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. Our first step for all of these is going to be to disconnect the battery. We're going to undo the negative terminal first, 10 mil socket. If you want to be extra safe, you can put some towel or something in between these so they don't make contact. And then just so we don't forget, we are going to either put a towel or just put the trunk liner back in, sticking out so that no one closes this trunk, making it harder to get to the battery when we're done. All right, with the battery done, we are going to get some covers out of our way, starting with the beauty cover. Let's pop that baby up and set it to the side. It's also worth noting that I undid the hood shocks and propped it up with the best hood shock of all, a broomstick, so that the hood is way more open, giving us way more light to work in. It'll also give you way more room to work in if you're doing this at home, and also will give you the best view, hopefully, of everything. Just with the beauty cover exposed, we have a great viewpoint of the valve cover, the fuel rail, the high pressure fuel pump, not the Vano solenoids, which are on the back. So again, regardless of which 4-part series you're watching, you may see some things that are missing, some things that are moved, and you know, some of those may not apply for your specific DIY, which we'll leave our magical editors to take care of. So don't be alarmed if you see a cover missing or a seal missing. All right, next on our laundry list of things to do is to get this seal out. And there's a wire that runs through the seal. You can just literally pull it out like so, and then pull the seal towards you and set it to the side. We have 2 little cowl plates, one on either side, that just have a 1/4 turn lock that you need to twist to undo and pull up. This side we're gonna pull off, and then the driver's side, and then we're gonna tackle the negative battery terminal on the auxiliary battery, just as insurance, just so that we have that undone and the whole car is completely without power. Next, we're gonna undo the 13mm nut on the negative terminal of our auxiliary battery. All right, so next on the list is going to be to disconnect the windshield wipers, and these have the built-in nozzles where the sprayers on them. So we're gonna have to disconnect the lines so that once we pop those caps off, we can move the wipers out and set them to the side. The window's a little dirty. We're gonna keep the window dirty because that's gonna be our marker for where the blades need to go on when we reinstall them. So just a quick tip, you can use painter's tape and mark the height of the windshield wipers as well, whatever is easiest for you. So we have the driver's side hose here. Has a funky little looking clip that we're gonna pull out just to unlock the line. Then the line will be disconnected, and then we'll throw our clip back on so that we don't lose it. We'll do the same thing to the other wiper arm here. We're gonna pop the covers, the protective covers off of our wiper arm. Just using a little flathead to get under it. You can use a plastic trim removal tool, but these should come off fairly easy. 16mm socket, we're gonna break those free first, and then we'll zap them out. My trick to getting these off without a puller or anything like that is to push on the flex point on the wiper arm, and then that usually breaks the seal here. So doing something like this. I'm gonna set this to the side. We'll do the same thing on the other one. Next, we're gonna start lifting up this cowl piece. On this end here, there's a little tab. You're gonna pull that towards the engine bay, and that's gonna release it on that side. We'll do the same thing on the passenger side. And we'll set this baby to the side. Great time to clean it out. Next, we're gonna remove this second cover here. It's held in by 6 8mm bolts. This weather stripping on the strut towers, just pop it up, and you'll find the furthest one on the strut tower itself. Get to that last 8mm, we're gonna zap off this 13. All right, next on our valve cover removal, we are going to be removing the resonator. We're gonna pull out the resonator and the air box in full. It's just another plug and clamp, and then that'll give us way more room just to get our cameras in here and all that good stuff. We're gonna start with our connector here for our sensor at our air box and our clamp. Little flathead to release the gray lock, push down and release. And then we're gonna free it up from the alligator clip off the resonator as well. Just gonna use the same flathead to get it pried off. The main reason for removing all of this is so that we can get to some of the more buried plugs on the back side of this, which is gonna allow us to eventually swing all the wiring harness that runs over and in front of the valve cover up and out of our way. You may be able to squeeze some of it around, but really there's no point in making it harder for yourself than it needs to be. So just taking off these few bits will go a long way. We'll separate the air box from the resonator, set this to the side. Looking at the resonator, down here we have another harness that goes to our diverter valve. We'll unplug that. That'll help with the flathead under the lock tab. Goes a long way. There we go. Then we'll pull that off the resonator as well. Another alligator clip there. We have another electrical connector going to our Evap line here. Same thing, another gray locking clip. Press to release. That baby can unplug. PCB line up top, ridged on either side. Pinch both sides. That'll help open up the little tabs holding this onto the valve cover. All right, got half of it started. I'm going to use a flathead to help free up the front half here, very gently. There we go. Here's a better view at that. You just press these two sides in, and that's going to unlock these two halves or widen them out so that it stops biting onto the valve cover. All right, following this down, we have a clip at our turbo. We're going to release that clip, pull it back a little bit, but not too far, so that we have better access to this Evap line going down to it. There's actually two of them. Now we can pull this whole assembly back a bit. Oh, the clip went back on. Just going to pull the clip off in full. We'll throw it on after. And that'll come back. And now we have a better view at that Evap line up top. There's two of them stacked. We have to undo both and separate them from each other. So let me work at that. Same idea as here. We're going to pinch to release, and then we'll get those off and out of our way. Throw our clip back on it before I forget. Beautiful. Let's set this to the side and we'll continue on with some more wiring. Next, we're going to remove the charge pipe. We have another clip at the bottom underneath the turbo inlet, very similar to the one we just did for the resonator. Then we'll put the clip back on after the fact. We have two electrical connectors going to it up top and an alligator clip. You know the drill, gray locking tab, unlock, press in to release the tab, and remove. 3 T30s hold this on. One's at the bottom, a little bit hidden over here, and then these two up top. Let's zap those out. All right, we'll come back in a moment. We're going to be disconnecting some more plugs, getting that acoustic cover off, and going from there. Auxiliary pump plug down here is coming undone next. So I'm going to use my little flathead once we release the gray locking tab to help free it up. All right, we have an alligator clip going off the auxiliary pump. Just fire the wiring, follow the wiring going to it. We'll pop that baby off next. Right next to this auxiliary pump, you'll notice on the top of the cylinder head, we have a ground cable. That's going to be a 10mm nut. We're going to undo that and throw the nut back on. That's going to come up with this bunch of harness right here, which we will be unclipping and swinging up and over. So let's grab a 10mm, zap that baby out. We'll throw the nut back on, and then these two right here will be nice and free for us when that time comes. We have a 10mm nut on the bottom of this auxiliary water pump. We're going to undo that nut, pull the pump out, and just let it kind of hang loose. That's going to allow us to swing out that wiring that we just freed up a little bit easier. All right, that's going to hang out there. These are free. That's going to be part of that bunch. These are both free. That's looking great. So we are making progress. To give us some more room, this Evap line splits off into two. One goes into the intake manifold and one goes into the vent valve. We're going to undo the one off the intake manifold, and then we'll undo the one off the vent valve. And then from there, more than likely, we'll be removing that vent valve out of our way. So we'll be doing that electrical connector and this line too, so we can swing that baby up and over once we get there. For now, let's undo intake manifold side right here and vent valve right there. So same deal, you have a pinch on the top and bottom to pull off those lines. They're a lot of fun. The top one is also held in right here on top of this wiring harness. Just pop that up. Squeeze and pull, there's one. This one, the bottom pinch is on the bottom, or the other side of that is on the bottom half, which makes it really tedious to get to. This one's a little tough. I might just go with the pick or the flathead to help me. Electrical connector to the top of that Evap pressure sensor. And then this baby can come out. All right, let's set this to the side with the rest of our stuff. To get this cover off, it's held on by 4 expanding rivets. I'm just using this trim removal tool to get these babies started. We'll get the center section pulled out, and then we'll come back for the rest of it. Let's see if we can get it off in one. We have a third one that's located down here below the lower auxiliary pump. It's a little bit tricky to see, but you can get to it with something like this tool. And that's going to expose that crank pulley down below, which if we need to, we can turn with our specialty socket by getting that on there and giving it a couple twists. All right, let me set these things to the side, and then we're going to continue on with the wiring for the injectors, the ignition coils. We'll pull the ignition coils out of our way and go from there. All right, we're going to continue on with the injector replacement as well as the valve cover removal. For the injectors, you really only need to get away with unplugging and removing one of the ignition coils. For the sake of today's video, we are going to zap all of them out, get them out of our way. It takes 2 seconds. And honestly, if it's your first time doing injectors on this platform, it might be better to be able to see exactly what you're doing. So getting out all the ignition coils is going to be the way. So let's start with that. We have 4 electrical connectors. We have 4 E8s to remove for the ignition coils. For this one, we have to remove this electrical connector here, which has to come out for our high pressure fuel pump anyways. All right, so what happened here is this should have just came unplugged. Then we could have came back and released this little center tab here from the back side to get this out. But nonetheless, this does have to come out, so that just saves us a step. But if yours hasn't been off before, it might be a little bit tighter to get out. All right, I'm going to set these to the side. We have an 8mm ground for the fuel rail / wiring harness. And then we'll undo all the injectors plugs as well. We have an 8mm nut to release so that we can remove that ground on top of the fuel rail. I'm just going to start it, and then we'll go in by hand so we don't lose it in this oil abyss that is our valve cover. That baby's going to come up, and that's going to release this bracket. With the bracket up enough, I'm going to just thread the 8mm back on so I don't have to guess where it is later when I need it. If we need to remove it later, we can. All right, let's release the fuel injectors, electrical connectors. You know the drill. Gray release tab, push in, pull up. We're going to do that 4 times. Might as well free up this one that's in our way. Alligator clip on top of the valve cover. You know the drill. All right, we're just going to continue doing the other 3 the same way. Hopefully we have better luck with these plugs. We have an alligator clip here holding this onto the valve cover. Let's release that. And then this baby can swing over totally out of our way. To get it from bouncing back, there's 2 little release tabs on top of here. Push those forward, lift up the bracket, or push them away, away from the engine block. Lift up the bracket, and that'll swing those over. And that's one less thing we have to worry about. With that open, we have a pretty good view of our fuel rail, as well as the hard line between the high pressure fuel pump and the rail itself, which will have to be undone. All right, before we get to that point, let's take care of this pressure sensor connector on the front. We're going to take care of this connector up top of here as well. One more on top of the valve cover here. We're just going to get rid of all of these now. All right, we're going to get this acoustic cover off the cylinder head here. Following this over, we have Torx holding that in. So we're going to get that off. We also have another electrical connector here that's in our way. And this we can just pop off like so, twist it out at an angle. We're going to undo this alligator clip here off of the valve cover to free up this harness. Let's take care of the electrical plug going to our high pressure fuel pump now. Let's tackle this plug up here. And really the only thing holding this harness here from being swung over is the connector for the throttle body, which is on the back side. I think we're going to go ahead and loosen it up just to give us more working room so we don't have to fight it later. So to get that, first let's undo this coolant line here. There's just an alligator clip that'll open up, and that line can be moved around. Then we're going to swing over to the back side, undo the throttle body plug, and then we can weasel it out from this bracket here, and that's going to allow us to free this up a bit more. And that's right next to the throttle body, similar to the one that was on the front acoustic cover. To release this front bracket, we have two tabs here. We're just going to pull towards us and lift. All right, we are making headway, my good people. We have a fuel line that goes to our high pressure fuel pump, and then we have the fuel line from the pump to the rail. So what we're gonna do next is crack the lines at the rail and the pump, and then from there we'll head over to the back. We'll undo the little E-Torques holding the rail to the valve cover, and then we're probably gonna have to move this vent valve out of our way to get to that fuel line in the back. So let's do that next. We're going to take our 17mm flared wrench, break these fittings free. There's going to be some fuel that spills out, which is why we have shop towels in place. Just go nice and slowly as you release them. We have 8 E6 bolts to remove. First, those are going to undo the injectors from the fuel rail. And then we have 4 E8s to separate the fuel rail from the top of the cylinder head. So let's zap these out. These are also only one-time use bolts per BMW. All right, now let's blast out the 4 E8s, holding that in. We have 4 studs that are gonna go into where the larger E8 bolts went. Those are gonna help support everything as we pull the injectors out. Again, we're using the CTA tool, so we're gonna undo the 10mm bolts through. These are ready to rock there. First, let's get our locks onto the injectors. To show you a nice close-up of how these work, I grabbed one of the new ones. You can see here, the tool is channeled to receive the flats on the fuel injector. So those are gonna go in like so. You're going to rotate the tool 90 degrees, push down this little lock, and basically that's just going to trap this in here from being able to come out. Pretty straightforward, pretty neat. So these are going to be sitting in the car like so. So we're going to go on over the top, rotate, and then lock it. And then once we start threading the tool on, this will pull it up and keep it fully locked. So let's get these 4 on first. Feed our bolt and our stud through. There's magnets in the studs, these little sleeves that are going to keep that from falling through. So we're just going to use the holes that are appropriate for this setup. You can use these on a couple different B48, B38 alternatives. So what we're going to do is then we're going to feed this over and get the tool kind of lined up sitting on top of the fuel injectors. We're going to turn the top pieces once we get them rested correctly, and those will start threading into that top of the tool that we inserted onto the injector. And that'll also help us line up the tools so that we can get these 10mm started. All right, now that they all have a few threads on them, we're gonna gently draw those 10mm in. We're not gonna crank them down. We just wanna snug them up a little bit. All right, we have our tool in. We have these top silver pieces that we thread on clockwise and start biting the top piece that we put on the injector. Sometimes they can start pulling them up. You can see this one's already loose. So it started pulling up the injector before we even turned the brass piece. With them all a little bit engaged and started, we're gonna snug down these tents very gently. And using our adjustables, these are righty loosey technically, they're reverse thread. So we can get our pliers on here, start turning those, and then that is going to pull the injector up. Like I said, this one was already a little bit loose, So it's coming up no problem. Let's get the next one started. As cheap insurance, we're throwing some shop towel down the fuel injector holes just to keep crud out from falling in them while we're doing this valve cover. I don't suspect there's really anything for there to fall in there, but there was a mouse nest in here, which you saw a lot of the insulation missing from and whatnot, so not the worst idea. I just have some shop towel pieces ripped in half, and then I'm squeezing them down there out of our way of the valve cover replacement. All right, there is two things to keep in mind when doing this. Again, if you're just doing the valve cover gasket, there's a specific unbolting sequence you need to follow. We'll put up a graphic on the screen showing you the number of the bolts, and then the removal process is going to be removing 15 all the way to 1. Obviously, install is going to be the reverse. Also, the second thing to know, we still have our cam sensors in this valve cover. We can pull those off after the fact. We have 2 new ones that we're going to be installing on our new valve cover. All we're going to steal from this are the Torx bolts. So another thing to consider replacing while you're doing this job. Once we go to put our new one on, after everything's nice and clean, same thing, we'll show you the process for the tightening sequence and how to tighten them so that nothing warps. Honestly, if you're not reusing this valve cover like we are not today, really, I don't see the harm in zapping them out in any order because this is not going to be reused again. But we're going to pretend as if we were reusing it, and we'll unbolt in the correct order, starting at 15 and working our way back to 1. We have our E10 socket on our ratchet. We have 2 E6 bolts to remove. That's going to help hold on this harness here and this positive line, positive power cable. Now we're going to switch over to our E10. And again, we're going to follow the unbolting sequence as if we were reusing this valve cover, starting at 15, working our way back to 1. Now you can see why we need that cowl off, because there's a lot of height here to cover. Here is our old valve cover, grimy and disgusting. You can see the gasket was stuck behind. Let's get this thing out of our sight. Let's get those old gaskets off. Let's clean off our surface. Let's get ready to install some fresh goodness. All right, we have our cylinder head nice and clean. We made sure there's no shop towel or anything like that left behind, any debris. Obviously, if you get any fine particles, that's what the oil filter is there for. Change the oil soon if you feel like you've gotten a lot of dirt in your engine. Nonetheless, this is spotless. It's good to rock and roll. Again, we're going with a new valve cover. The bolts are captured on there. The new gasket is already installed from BMW. So we're just going to feed this over gently, trying not to disturb the gaskets on here so that we don't have to pick it back up and fight that as we go in. That's the one nice thing about doing a new cover, is that these usually do a pretty good job at staying in place. Just make sure you don't pinch anything on the way in. Bam, no problem. We're gonna get all of these bolts just started by hand. I'm gonna follow the sequence, the tightening sequence from 1 to 15, even though I'm just snugging them by hand. And then we're gonna do 2 stages of tightening. We're gonna do 8 Newton meters and then 11 Newton meters. So we'll probably zip through the hand tightening part, and then we'll pick it up with the torque wrench. All right, that was 8 Newton meters. Now we're gonna bump it up to 11. Do the same pattern again, 1 through 15. Beautiful. Everything's torqued down. From here, we're gonna get our cam sensors in. We'll put the oil cap on just so that's not open to the world. And then we'll continue back with the fuel injectors. We'll get the fuel rail in, high pressure fuel pump, fuel lines. And then we're gonna start swinging some wiring over. Oh, but before we do all that, let's get these 2 E6s secured. Those are the kind of things that you forget about when you get excited and you start putting things back together. So with this bracket buttoned up, we don't have to worry about it after. We have our work area nice and clean. One final vacuum before we pull out our little paper sleeves. Now we're gonna feed this in, and our goal is to get it flush to the cylinder head just by pushing down on all the injectors evenly. And that was pretty much it. They pretty much almost dropped all the way in, just a little press. And all our electrical connectors are in the right spot, exactly where we want them to be. All right, now we're gonna get our new hardware fed in by hand, and then we'll go from there. All right, with the fuel rail fully seated in, we're gonna hand finger tighten the 4 bolts that hold on the fuel rail. And these are addressed as bolt A, bolt B, bolt C, and bolt D per BMW. We're gonna grab our E8, and again, just finger snug these down. So now our next goal is to ensure that the fuel rail is fully flush onto the cylinder head. At this point, we're pretty close with how far it went down. The next required step would be to get a torque wrench, set it to 2 Newton meters. So basically in a cross, so again, A, D, B, and C. You're gonna tighten those in 90-degree intervals until they hit 2 Newton meters. Well, the reality is I don't have a torque wrench that does 2 Newton meters. It's almost nothing. So what we're gonna do is give them a quarter turn each, 90 degrees. And then we're gonna go in with our flashlight and we're gonna check to make sure that if that rail is seated all the way down to the top of the cylinder head. And if that looks good, we'll go from there. If it doesn't, we'll give it another round of 90-degree turns and then check once more. Just from what I could feel and what I can see here looking in with my flashlight, I am very confident this fuel rail is fully seated. We're gonna go back to A and see if there's any looseness in it. That's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. And that's not going anywhere. So we're gonna take that as fully seated / 2 Newton meters achieved. Now we're gonna set our torque wrench to 5 Newton meters and repeat again and get this snugged up. All right, it's worth noting that BMW wants you to use a ratchet or torque wrench that cannot do this, that cannot wind back. It can only go in one direction. Again, that's not something we're equipped with here. That's not something we typically use, and you probably won't at home either. So the best thing I can suggest is just take your time, get your torque wrench set at that engagement position before you do anything, and then be very mindful about how you rotate it. Torque wrench is set to 5 Newton meters in that same A, D, B, C pattern. We're gonna tighten all of them to 5 Newton meters. All right. Those are there. Those are good to rock and roll. With the rail secured for now, don't worry, we will have to undo it again later. We're gonna move on to the injector, so let's get ready for that. All right, next on our list, we're gonna hand tighten the fuel injector bolts down by hand, again, just with our fingers. So for that, we have our E6 Torx bit. We're gonna do them in pairs, right? So it's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll start with 1, 2, just snug them up by hand, and then we'll go from there. Now we're gonna set our torque wrench, again, once more to 5 Newton meters. And in 90-degree increments, we're gonna rotate the bolts. So we're gonna do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, in 90-degree turns until they achieve 5 Newton meters. Then we're gonna repeat the same steps on 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8. So again, bolt 1, 90 degrees, bolt 2, 90 degrees, bolt 1, 90 degrees, bolt until they hit 5 Newton meters. And that one's at 5, so we stop. You don't have to complete the 90 degrees if the torque wrench clicks. We're gonna do the same thing on the next 3 injectors. Let me zap through that real quickly, and then we'll pick it back up in a second. All right, with bolts 1 through 8 torqued down to 5 Newton meters, now they're all gonna require a 90-degree additional turn. BMW suggests marking the bolts with a paint pen. This one's kind of thick, so it's gonna be a little bit tough, but we're just gonna pretend here because we're gonna be able to just track our rotation of the ratchet. So the goal here is just to get all these vertical lines that I so carefully did and have them be totally horizontal. So again, 190-degree rotation for all 8. So let's do that next. I'm gonna keep using the torque wrench, how I have it set up, still set to 5 Newton meters with the E6 at the end, but I have an extension here to give me plenty of room so I don't hit anything on the engine bay. All right, at that point, those babies are snugged down. All our lines are horizontal. Again, use your imagination here with me, my good people. They all have a 90-degree turn. All right, we're not done yet. On to the next step. All right, for the next step, we're gonna be doing something similar to the 4 main bolts that hold our fuel rail in place. But first, we have to loosen them. So we're gonna go A, B, C, and D. We're gonna crack those free. Really about a quarter turn is all they need to be loosened up. And now, in the order of how we snugged them down before, A, D, B, and C, we are going to snug them up until we hit 5 Newton meters for each one. And we're gonna crank those in the same order, an additional 90 degrees until all our lines are horizontal. Well, if you made it this far, my good people, congratulations. Your fuel rail is officially installed along with your injectors. At this point, if you're just doing injectors, the fuel line between the high pressure fuel pump and the fuel line can go back in. We'll get our other fuel line hooked up, and then we can swing over our harness and start plugging in electrical connectors, pressure sensor, all that good stuff. For us here today, for the focus of this DIY, the valve cover DIY at least, continuing on with that, we are gonna move on to getting our cam sensors in, and then we'll get our high pressure fuel pump in, and then we will pick it up from there. So let's continue on with that. All right, we're gonna pretend that our valve cover didn't come with a new gasket, and we're gonna show you how to install the new gasket. There is a little alignment dowel on that gasket that's gonna be on the lower left side towards the firewall of the valve cover, and that's gonna help you kind of key this up in place. It really only goes on one way. Once you get it started, it's got a semi-square profile. Just feed it in the rest of the way. Now we're gonna grab our pump, ready to rock and roll. Feed that baby in. We already covered the cam low position. We're gonna get our T30 dropped in here, one on the front side and one on the back side of both fuel line fittings. Okay. And we're gonna get these started by hand with the T30. BMW wants you to turn these at a quarter turn at a time to drive the pump fully seated. So what I'm gonna do is just get them drawn in close to the pump with the electric ratchet. Once we're about to make contact with the pump, we'll move over to the 1/4 inch ratchet, do that 90 all the way through, and then we'll torque them down properly. So again, I'm just drawing this closer to the pump. Now we'll do our 90s all the way through until they get to kind of start snugging up, and then we'll move to the torque wrench. This is gonna ensure that you don't damage the pump or anything like that, and that it seats properly. All right, at this point, we're gonna switch to the torque wrench. We're gonna set it to 12 Newton meters. The torque spec for this is 12 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. All right, with our high pressure fuel pump on, the next step is gonna be to hook up the fuel line. So we have a fuel line between the rail and the pump, and then from the pump to the feed from the car. So I'm gonna swing that one from the feed over. We'll just get it snugged up over here for now. We'll get the other line in place, and then we'll snug them up. I'm gonna pop our cover off the high pressure fuel pump. We're gonna get this line kind of resting where we want it to be. We must also remember we have a little rubber grommet that lives in these 2 channels on the valve cover. So that will want to rest like so once we feed the line in. That way we know that it's in the right spot. We're gonna get that E6 bolt started back there as well. Now that our line is just finger tight up to the pump. This one's a little buried back here, but it helps hold the fuel line in place. And gently, we're gonna snug it up with the electric ratchet. It's just going into plastic, don't over tighten it. Torque spec for these fuel lines is 33 Newton meters. The best way to achieve that is gonna be with a crow's foot. We're just gonna use our line wrench and snug them up. It's not a lot of torque. And as you remembered when you took it apart, it wasn't really that tight. So I'm just gonna go until it's nice and snug. I'm not gonna over crank it. Once it stops, we're good. We're gonna mark it with a paint pen, so we have reference of where that nut stopped. And then we're gonna keep the acoustic cover, the beauty cover, off until we run the car and make sure we have no fuel leaks. So that'll also be a helpful way to check for stuff, for any errors. Let's get this fuel line in. While we have all the room in the world, we're gonna pop these ignition coils back in. and get those babies situated. The back side of the harness here, this bracket, has these two little like alignment dowels. Those simply just kind of go over the two bolt holes on the valve cover. Just helps guide them, that's all, as you swing that over. We're gonna lock in this bracket now up front here so that everything is kind of fixed in its place. Again, it just slides on to these two tabs on the top of the valve cover. And that is gonna be a T25. We're just gonna snug that up gently. Again, it's just going into plastic. I'm gonna leave it a little loose until we get this rivet here at the front. You'll see the opening on the cylinder block. We had thrown that one in there before so we didn't lose it. Now we know we're gonna use it again. We're going to put it back in with the cover. Just push it in. Beautiful. Now we can snug that T25 back up the rest of the way, just kind of holding the cover so it doesn't spin it. All right, this wiring can come up. We have these two babies right here. Let's get a little bit of this oil off of that plug. I'm gonna clip this baby to a little tab here. It's got an alligator clip, and we're gonna slide it back into its home here. There we go. These two can now kiss. Make sure that's fully seated. Then we can lock in the gray tab and then slide that onto the back side here. But before we do that, I'm gonna leave it loose until we get the ignition coil situated. This electrical plug can go back here. I think this is just a little dummy plug. Okay. High pressure fuel pump can go back in. If you haven't done so already, we covered it before, but just the alligator clip in the back for the Vano solenoid wiring. That's gonna bite right there. Just a little fin on the back of the valve cover. Okay. Next on our laundry list, we're gonna resecure that ground up front while we still have all the room in the world. 10mm nut. We're gonna make sure that we feed it behind the auxiliary water pump bracket as it was. Get that nut back on. And then we'll snug it up with the 10mm once more. All right, that's gonna stay loose and off for now. We gotta swing this baby over. That's gonna live here on the valve cover. It's just gonna key in. We have another T25 holding down this little bracket right there. We'll snug that up. This wire can come back over and just tuck back into this bracket here. We can clip in our other cam sensor. We're gonna plug in our fuel injectors, our ignition coils, and for what it's worth, we are currently working at the time of shooting this on sourcing these connectors, the housings separately, so that you can repair them if they break. So with that, be sure to stay tuned on fcpo.com if you want to get those later on. We're going to clip these 8 in, and then we'll secure the bracket on top of the intake manifold, just so we have wiggle room like this if we need it. I'm just going to start at the rear injector and work my way forward. We have an 8mm on top of the fuel rail, which we had threaded back in. Should have taken that off first, but that's okay. I can still get it out. That's gonna be for our ground. Just don't drop it, Mike. Let's get the ignition coils plugged back in. The wiring is basically lying exactly where we need it to go, which is nice. We can now secure this bracket back onto the bracket here. Wonderful. Pressure sensor can be clipped back in. Valve cover, alligator clip right there. Speaking of alligator clips, let's clip in this harness here on the intake manifold. Intake manifold has these two stands coming off of it right in front of the coolant line. That's gonna clip in there. And then alligator clip right there on the valve cover fin. All right, that's looking good. At this point, we have pretty much everything that's on this side of things hooked up. From there, we're gonna start working over our Evap line. We'll get that brought over. This is for the pressure sensor on top of the Evap line. We'll get that plugged in. I think we are going to start acoustic cover, Evap lines, charge pipe, auxiliary water pump, all that good stuff. So let's get ready for that next. Acoustic cover is gonna go back in. All right, let's get this auxiliary pump and this cable situated. First, we're gonna put the wiring harness back on. It's gonna go alligator clip right on the acoustic cover. This is gonna be the cable for the lower auxiliary water pump. Sorry for the view, we're just plugging this back in. Pretty straightforward. Alligator clip on the pump. You can close this little clamp up. 10 mil can come off of the auxiliary water pump bracket. Let's get that baby fed in there. All right, we're gonna throw that 10 mil back on and secure the pump. Before we secure this coolant line back in place, we are going to sneak the plug-in for the throttle body back through the bracket. This clamp that holds in the harness here can be clicked back together. You want to see the plug-in putting back here? I was not so kind to this clip earlier. We'll have to replace this, but it'll still do its job. That's going to be the coolant line that we're securing back up. Let's plug in our auxiliary pump once more. That's this upper one here. All right, let's swing this wiring up top. All right, next we're going to feed in the charge pipe. 3 T30s up top, the clip down at the bottom. Let's get that in. That's looking good. Let's get our Evap line in next. And then we're going to join this Evap line with the other line down by the turbo. All right, let's get our resonator / silencer portion of the intake back in place, and then we'll go from there. All right, dropping this baby in. Before we go full engaged on the turbo, we're gonna get that Evap line situated. So don't mind me while I block your view for a second. Okay, turbo's gonna go turbo inlet back in. Wanna hear that click. That's exactly what we want. We have a connector that's just hanging out down there. That's gonna go to that little 2-pin plug here on this other Evap line. Evap line can go on top of the valve cover. All right, we have our diverter valve plug, which can go back in. Lock that in. Alligator clip on the resonator, like so. All right, we're looking good. Our rubber grommets stayed behind for the air box, except for the bottom one down here by the inlet. So I'm gonna put that one back in first, and then we'll feed the air box back in. Let's get our sensor plugged back in here on the air box. Alligator clip on the back side of the resonator. Beautiful. All right, we're starting to look pretty dang good at this point. We're gonna get our cowling put back together. We'll get the auxiliary battery hooked up, windshield wiper arms in, weather stripping in, acoustic or beauty cover on the top end. I'm gonna wrap up this DIY, so let's get to it. We're gonna throw our half-eaten insulation panel back on. Just make sure you stay underneath this wire, which goes in our hood weather stripping. Before we put our insulation on, this is a great reminder, which I needed, and that is going to be that the old valve cover, we have to steal these little stands off of them, and those are going to be there for our insulation and our beauty cover. It's interesting, they have some of them, but they don't have all of them. So I'm just using some adjustable pliers. Let's see if I can get this one off all the way. So I don't want to go back in my toolbox and get more tools. 13 mil socket will get the 2 rear standoffs for the insulation cover that we're going to be working with. All right, let's transfer those babies over. We'll put this back on the table in case we need to come back to it again. 10 mil wrench for this baby. These are coarse threads, so they might take a little bit to self-tap into the valve cover. Let's get the 2 13s in the back. Now we're gonna get the next piece of the cowling in. On the back side of the cowl, we have this very thin ridge that is going to key into the bottom of the windshield. If we look at the bottom of the windshield for a second, we'll see what is basically this like rubber seal or rubber gasket, and it's hard to see, but there's just a thin channel here, and that's going to help key in this piece once we have it fully locked in, along with the little tabs that kind of help hold this gutter system in place. So pretty straightforward, really nothing special about it. Just make sure you have it positioned correctly before you start pressing down on anything and seating that lip in. So kind of how we took it out, we're going to put it back in at an angle and being mindful not to scratch our fender or anything like that. That is looking good. Let's get our windshield wiper blades back on. Let's get this cowl piece back on over here. These have two little alignment tabs and little openings on the back to help key them in. If you've been playing along, you can hook up your negative terminal for the auxiliary battery one more time. Let's get that one started by hand first. It can be a little funky with the cable being attached to the 13mm nut. Good to rock. Let's get this windshield washer fluid line out of the way so we don't pinch it. All right, let's get our hood seal back in as well. All right, at this point, all we really have left is our beauty cover. We're gonna keep that off until we start the car to make sure we have no leaks anywhere, especially in our fuel system. So with that, we're gonna reattach the battery in the trunk, get those two 10mm negative and positive terminals situated, and then we'll hop in and give her a start and just give it a minute, check for leaks, make sure we don't smell anything out of the ordinary. We should be good to go from there. All right, we'll start with our positive terminal. Get that baby fed over. We're just gonna snug up this 10mm. All right, my good people, we got the car back together. That is gonna conclude this valve cover replacement. Overall, a pretty involved job, but nothing difficult. A lot of wire in there's to tackle. Again, this is gonna be the main video of the 4-part series where we focus on everything. But if you're just looking to see the high pressure fuel pump or the fuel injectors or the Evap solenoids, be sure to check those videos out as well. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you'd like this DIY and you'd like to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.